Welcome back, bad apple of the bunch, analysing dud stories from otherwise celebrated writers, yada yada yada, you get the point already. Although maybe this instalment should have a title more relevant to the festive period. How about Lump of Coal in Your Stocking? I don't know, let's just get on with this. Steven Moffat. Steven William Moffat, OBE. Need I say anything more? A prolific scribe of dozens of fan favourites across 12 years of televised Doctor Who. Haunting moving statue horror Blink, World War II themed Night of Frights The Empty Child, energetic 11th Doctor debut outing The 11th Hour, moody body horror series finale The Doctor Falls, shady tribute to literacy Silence in the Library, emotional grieving inner monologue Heaven Sent, conspiratorial western thriller The Impossible Astronaut, chronologically fractured love story The Girl in the Fireplace, and of course 50th anniversary celebratory epic The Day of the Doctor, and many, many more. Steven is an absolute powerhouse of childhood scarring terror, relentless sex jokes, and mind-melting timey-wimey plotting. It is no question that he is one of the most celebrated and acclaimed talents to ever be associated with the franchise. And also one of the most controversial. Indeed, a small part of me did contemplate whether he could even qualify for this series, if his reputation as a beloved writer whose output is overwhelmingly treasured was clear-cut enough. But you know what? I've been giving it some consideration, and yes. Yes, he does qualify. Don't get me wrong, some of his later entries in particular are shrouded in discourse and endless debates over their merits. Twice Upon a Time, Listen, and that spicy little entry called Hellbent are hot-button discussion topics, particularly in online circles. But it's, as I said, there is endless debate, meaning there's a substantial number of defenders of these entries who are there to combat the criticism, and more than likely outnumbering it significantly. So with that said, it's my observation that nearly all of Moffat's work can be divided among two major categories: his universally celebrated gems that continue to top episode rankings, or his divisive entries where whatever negative backlash it receives is heavily contested. There are very, very few scripts of his that I would actually concede are universally disliked by the audience at large. But if there is one, if there has to be one, it's 2011's The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe. So, Steven Moffat is an incredibly sentimental man, almost sickeningly so. And there is arguably no more definitive example of this than the way he handled the Christmas specials during his tenure. The return of Dr. Mysterio aside, all of them are aggressively enthusiastic about the holiday season, with smothering themes of love and togetherness, often in spite of impending loss. Both of his Doctors left in Christmas specials, both in incredibly heartfelt, uplifting ways that highlight their importance to children, and they all ramp up the campy comedy elements to the extreme for a cozy festive experience, even in the ones that are meant to be more emotionally devastating. The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe is certainly no exception to this. Steven wanted to make, in his words, a delightful comedy, and emphasise one of his favourite narrative tropes, to slip away from the real world and go to a completely magical one. Something that could be best described as literal escapism. I guess that explains the whole parallel to the Chronicles of Narnia then. Well, I must confess I'm certainly not as infatuated with Moffat's work as most other people seem to be, and I'm definitely not keen on his more schmaltzy side, but you know, we'll give this story a fair chance. Let's see what makes it tick. First things first, that title. As I mentioned, this episode presents itself as a pastiche on the Chronicles of Narnia, particularly The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Not the first time that Moffat has done this kind of thing for a Christmas special, of course. The previous year, he had penned A Christmas Carol, a time-rewriting sci-fi homage to the Charles Dickens classic of the same name. Moffat's take on A Christmas Carol fully embraced its own nature as a reimagined tribute, taking the setup of reforming a bitter curmudgeon via three ghosts of different tenses, and putting a time-travelling Doctor Who spin on it that only really Moffat could have done. And I guess you could say it set a precedent, as a year later The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe came along with a title and certain plot elements that similarly emulated and evoked Narnia. Now I must confess, I'm not really much of an expert on The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but I have a friend and colleague on the channel who is.
thought the balloon had gone up. What? She thought we'd had it. Huber, there's no point in holding back if the missile started flying. So she put us about it. She did not. Hello?
Hello, Ben, it's Will.
What?
Will!
William! Hello, stranger.
Do you know anything about the Chronicles of Narnia, Ben?
Not a thing.
Okay, no, I didn't mean him.
Huh?
And upon discussing the subject with him, I'm pretty confident in saying this episode doesn't really succeed as a homage. Let's see. There are World War II era kids that get evacuated to the countryside with their mother, but whatever, that's alright. And the TARDIS serves as the wardrobe allegory, except it isn't actually what takes them to the Winter Wonderland, like in the source material, rather this present portal thing does. And, well, the titular witch in the original tale was the Snow Queen, and, well, there is a queen here, the Queen of the Forest, who, neither has anything to do with snow, nor is a witch. In fact, the witch in the title is substituted by widow, which implies that the widowed Madge is serving that role. Except Madge doesn't play the same plot function or character beats as the witch whatsoever, nor is she, as it turns out, really a widow, but we'll tackle that later. And, as for the lion, well, there's a door knocker with the lion's face on it, but that's really about it. But wait, the Doctor's name is in the place of the lion in the title. Does that therefore mean that the Doctor is meant to be the Aslan stand-in? Does that therefore mean that the Doctor is meant to be Jesus? So, yeah, I think I've made it abundantly clear that this story doesn't allegorically succeed nearly as well as A Christmas Carol does. Now, that's not to say that this episode is bad because it fails as a pastiche, nor am I saying that it necessarily has to commit itself to its tribute act as rigorously as its predecessor, but it is just extremely bizarre how half-hearted and confused the homage is, and by the time we get to the climax, the episode pretty much drops it altogether. Like, at that point, why even bother with the illusion if you're that disinterested in making it work in the first place? Was it something only tacked on midway through scripting and just integrated badly? Or did Moffat actually conceive the episode with the homage in mind and just ran out of enthusiasm for it? Though, if this episode is any example, then I'm glad that Moffat abandoned the festive adaptations at this point in his tenure, otherwise we might have ended up with Doctor Who versions of It's a Wonderful Life and, I don't know, Elf or something. And then where would we be? So with that out of the way, let's tackle the plot of the episode and the central themes and emotional conflicts within. Early in the episode, we are introduced to Madge Arwell, a 20th century wife and mother of two, who happens to be passing by and decides to help the Doctor back to the TARDIS after an unrelated misadventure of his. We are then introduced to Madge's family and, with the threat of the war looming over Europe established, her husband goes off to help with the war effort, and is subsequently lost, presumed dead, in 1941. Receiving the news so close to Christmas, she doesn't want to immediately inform their children and forever tarnish the holiday season for them, and so her motivation for the runtime is to bottle it all up and maintain the high spirits of her daughter Lily and son Cyril for the duration of the festivities and protect them from any emotional harm, as well as physical harm later on. It's a serviceable emotional foundation to build her character on. I don't have any qualms with that premise. And it's in line with Moffat's festive MO, an existential theme of death to tie into the Christmas season, contrasting the happiest time of the year with the soul-numbing depression of grief. Is Moffat okay? Does he need a therapist? Well, either way, the Doctor feels compelled to return Madge's favour by posing as the caretaker of their new home and helping the family feel welcome, as well as creating a portal to an alien forest and having it be a present for them to open on Christmas Day. Moffat has openly expressed his enthusiasm for writing the Doctor at Christmas time and highlighting the character's eccentric generosity and how that makes him a perfect fit for the festive season. I find his perspective of the Doctor, especially in this episode, to be very overly mawkish and cheesy. The whole Make-A-Wish thing, tinkering and designing gadgets and toys for kids.
I know.
The Doctor has always had playfully youthful tendencies for sure, but I always preferred it when he was a self-satisfied eccentric who played the recorder and rolled a yo-yo and carried around a cricket ball for his own personal enjoyment and didn't care what anyone else thought about it. Moffat's take on the character, however, brought these childish elements to the forefront and had him actively play it up and serve it for the entertainment of children in universe as a metatextual commentary on what the show means to children in reality. And this shift is at its most prominent here.
A window disguised as a mirror disguised as a window.
It's a take on the character that has never done anything for me, although I guess points for consistency because it is very Santa Claus-like, and I suppose that is fitting for the occasion. Still not a fan though. So, during the night, Cyril opens the present early and goes exploring the alien forest, and the Doctor and Lily follow him inside, later followed by Madge herself. And okay, look, I know how ironic it might seem for a self-confessed fanboy of 1960s six-parters to say this, but there's a whole lot of unengaging nothing that happens during this stretch of the episode. It's mostly just empty obligatory tension that only exists to artificially create a bait-and-switch misunderstanding, where we might suspect that the trees are malicious when in actuality they're completely benevolent. And it's a shame because when Moffat applies his craft to the right scenario, he can be spectacular at creating a tense atmosphere. But this kind of stuff, it's a waste of your Moffat. Remember kids, spend your Moffats wisely. And this waste of skill also extends to the episode's usage of comedy. Now obviously comedy is a subjective thing, different strokes for different folks, but Moffat's comedy is something I can be extremely hit or miss on, though I recognise I'm in the minority for that. However, in this story's case, one of the biggest criticisms I see levelled at it is that despite its most try-hard in-your-face efforts, it's just not funny.
I have mother issues, sir.
No disagreements from me. It doesn't feel very well woven into the fabric of the rest of the story either. It feels very artificially segmented between the dramatic moments, making the tone feel herky-jerk. Also, this isn't a major criticism, but way to have some big comedy guest stars in your episode and not have them meet the Doctor at all. This is a far cry from Simon Pegg in Series 1, isn't it? Either way, another theme of the adventure becomes prominent towards the climax when Madge, upon discovering from some disposable comedy characters that the forest is to be melted down for fuel using acid rain, defies all the odds and pilots an alien tripod that requires years of training to find and rescue her children. It's meant to be one of those dramatic power of parenthood moments. A mama bear summoning up all her strength to lift a metaphorical car to save her children pinned underneath. The theme continues on when it's revealed the trees need a host to, well, host their life force and pilot their escape vessel away from the doomed woodland and into the time vortex. The Doctor offers himself but is rejected for being weak, and yet when Madge arrives, she happens to be the perfect candidate because she is female and a mother, and it's meant to be some symbolic acknowledgement of the nurturing strength of motherhood and wordplay on the term mothership. Right, I get that Moffat wanted to make an empowering statement for the ladies, but I think this needed workshopping. For one, boiling the strength of femininity down purely to the capacity of bearing children is certainly a choice, and a choice that comes off as a bit exclusive to women who cannot or do not want to be mothers. For second, this whole set piece might be more empowering if she didn't just, like, happen to be in the right place at the right time. The tree's whole escape plan hinges on a woman coincidentally turning up on this private tree farm before they're all melted. A state of affairs which Madge has little agency in, and also seems so unlikely that the trees might as well be waiting for the Last Judgment.
Okay, sorry to cut in here, Will, but I need to talk about how this whole motherhood theme really doesn't work with the whole C.S. Lewis pastiche.
Oh. Okay. Be my guest.
C.S. Lewis was a deeply religious man, and would as such put his beliefs into his work through subtle and not so subtle biblical references. You need only look at Aslan as an example. And one of the core beliefs that he held, honing from his background, was his belief in the purity of childhood innocence. A consistent theme throughout the Chronicles of Narnia is that only children may enter its world, that only due to their innocence that comes with childhood they can save Narnia. Yes, it's corny, but it's made perfectly clear that it is one of the key themes of the series, and when good old Steve decided to pastiche it, he threw that idea out the window. And it's not like he didn't know either. I mean, look at the scene where Cyril was made the pilot. It looks as though he will be the one to guide them home, similar to how only children are destined to save Narnia. But no, instead it is the power of motherhood that saves the day. Now, I don't necessarily mind that as a story beat in anything else, but given what this story is a pastiche to, it seems really off. Especially for a writer who, in other Christmas specials, would spend his time writing about the importance of children to Doctor Who and vice versa. It seems rather odd to not extend that same thematic cohesion to a Narnia knockoff. Anyway, that's all I had to say. You can have your video back now.
Thank you.
Hey, this is good practice for when we do our Who's Overlooked Writers collab.
Anyway, it's at this point, while piloting the vessel back home, where Madge's grieving arc reaches its climax, and she's forced to acknowledge her husband's presumed death in front of her children. Once they've safely arrived, and with her children horrified, she has to be brave and break the news to them properly, and on Christmas Day no less. Wow. Wow. That's actually really moving stuff. Madge learns that you can't bottle grief up. She has to confront reality and inform her children about what has happened to their father. And that actually helps to really strengthen and enhance the theme of motherhood, and it makes for a really empowering statement. That she, as a widow, has to do one of the hardest things that a parent can do for their children, and bear the responsibility of informing them that their father is dead.
Sorry to interrupt, but you might want to pop out here for a moment.
Sorry, I was in the middle of something here.
I know, and before you go any further, I think you better come and look.
What are you do-
Madge Yarwell, who flew a whole forest through the time vortex, plus one husband.
Mother Christmas.
Come on. Come on! Come on! You almost had something there. You had the emotionally resonant and satisfying culmination to both a character's internal journey and the episode's main theme right there in your hands, and you just had to subvert it for a cutesy cozy everybody lives happy ending that just feels incredibly cheap and hackneyed, especially by this point in Moffat's output. Yes, I know Moffat is no stranger to these ideal endings, where a death is subverted or reversed or cushioned by some sci-fi afterlife, but those other cases often made narrative sense with what was established, or actually complemented the journey that the character had gone on. Everybody Lives in The Empty Child? That was the first time since the Time War when the Doctor could have a victory with no blood spilled, and that really meant a lot to him. Everybody Lives in Silence in the Library? It serves as a triumphant, optimistic moment for the Doctor, where he can save one more life that will one day mean so much to him through a loophole, and ensure that his own future is happier because of it. Here though, having Madge's husband conveniently survive thanks to her guiding him through the vortex doesn't really enhance anything that the story had been going for. In fact, I dare say it detracts from it. As I said, I think her summoning the courage as a single parent to admit to her children that their father is dead, during a supposedly joyous period of time when she really didn't want to tell them, in a story that supposedly acknowledges and celebrates the hardships of being a mother, that would have been a far more powerful ending statement than this feel-good cuddliness. And I know exactly what y'all are gonna say, but Will, it's Christmas. You can't have downbeat endings like that on Christmas. It's a day of joy and celebrations and happiness. Why have you got to be such a downer on today of all days? And to that, I have to say, the animated holiday classic The Snowman literally ends with the child's living snowman having melted into a puddle at the end. Roll credits. And guess what? That's one of the most celebrated general Christmas stories of all time. If that can get away with it, what's this story's excuse? Sorry, was that a bit too much of an unrelated tangent? It probably was, wasn't it? Fine. Moffat's own A Christmas Carol the previous year makes it clear that Abigail is still terminally ill and that she and Kazran can only spend one last night together, and Kazran's emotional journey at the end is about him having to push through the pain of the inevitable, live for the moment, and spend that last night with her there and then. There's a more relevant tragic ending. If Moffat could do that there, then he could have done it here as well, but he chose not to, and as a result it cheapens the emotions of the story. Though I guess thematically, having this guy survive certain death and spend Christmas with his loved ones serves as a parallel to the Doctor having escaped certain death in The Wedding of River Song, and being convinced to spend Christmas with Amy and Rory at the end here. Yeah, forgive me for not being very impressed by that connection. I think I'd have rather had this story have a powerful, realistic message of its own, rather than shoot itself in the kneecap to serve as a fitting coda to the preceding series. Whatever, let's finish this. The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe is Moffat's tropes, skills and themes at their shoddiest. Madge's grief has potential but is pussyfooted out of right at the finish line, and the episode's celebration of motherhood is admirable in concept but in execution incredibly muddled. To add to that, I find Moffat's flanderized characterization of the Doctor and the tedious bait and switch concerning the true intentions of the trees and the lackluster comedy to make the experience even more excruciating than it needs to be. And ultimately it ends up feeling like a waste of an episode slot. And as I stated before, what's the point of presenting it as a Narnia pastiche if you're not going to do anything with it? I've already made it clear that I'm not a fan of Moffat's work or his general writing style, but even by his standards this is pretty dire. This isn't just a bad apple, this one's rotten.